Hey guys, Spudknocker here, as always. And alright guys, I know it's been a long time since this survey was released to you guys to respond to, and I do apologize for this growing and very concerning survey gap.
Mr. President, we must not allow a mineshaft gap!
Life has been rather hectic with a big move in airline training, but today we're going to go over the results of this survey and editorialize on them a little bit, but hopefully not too much. And I think we'll all gain some insight into the DCS World community. About a year and a half to 2 years ago now, we did our very first DCS World Player Survey, and it gave me a ton of insight into the community and my viewers. But more importantly, and really to my surprise, it gave a lot of third-party developers a great view into what DCS World Player trends were, and what aircraft, campaigns, and terrains they should pursue in their development efforts going forward. So if you're watching this and you are a first-party developer with Eagle Dynamics, or you're a third-party developer, or even a prospective third-party developer for DCS World, and you'd like to have access to the raw data of these results, please contact me, and I'd be more than happy to give it to you, and I would even be more than happy to walk you through the results and give you my 2 cents on these player trends going forward. So let's go ahead and get started, guys. Okay guys, let's hop right on into the results of our latest DCS World Player Survey. Big thank you to all of you guys out there who took the time out of your day to respond to this survey. It'll really help my channel. Hopefully it'll help some DCS World devs out there. And it's just really interesting to get some insights into the DCS World community, because it's not exactly your usual kind of Call of Duty-like video game that you can just pick up and run with, you know? So big thanks to you guys. We got just under 3,600 responses to this survey, and I think that's going to give us a really nice sample size to get an approximate on the whole DCS World community itself. So the first question here is that usual question of what is your age range? And by no big surprise, everything is kind of skewed towards older folks, and that's because DCS World is really a game that requires a lot of upfront investment to get the most out of it possible. To even run the game, you gotta have a pretty high-end PC. If you're playing on flat screen, you're gonna need a really nice screen. You're going to need head tracking, so that's going to be Tobii Eye Tracker or Track IR. Or if you're going the VR route, you're going to need a VR headset, which definitely isn't inexpensive. You're also going to need a whole bunch of peripherals. You're going to need a stick, you're going to need a throttle. If you're flying a helicopter, you may even want a collective. You're going to need rudder pedals. You're going to need a microphone for talking in multiplayer if you want to fly in multiplayer in DCS, and a whole host of other things like button boxes, display screens, pseudo cockpits, things like that that people get into as well. So I haven't actually put all of my DCS related expenses into a spreadsheet and added it up, but I'm definitely afraid to, and I'm sure some of you guys out there are definitely afraid to do that as well, because I know that I'm definitely going to be spending money on DCS for the foreseeable future, that's for sure. So 25% of, or more or less 25% of the DCS World community is age 30 to 40. Not a big surprise there, with the second age group being the 40 to 50-year-old age group. Behind them is going to be the 18 to 24-year-old age group, and then in fourth place is 24 to 30 years old. So almost 50% of the DCS, well, more than 50% of DCS World community is older than 30 years old. Makes total sense. Those are the folks who are going to have the time and the expendable income to really get the most out of DCS. However, one thing that did really surprise me about the results of this survey as compared to the results of the last time we did this survey was there are a lot more younger people flying in DCS. 10.7% are ages 14 to 18, with an additional 1% added on to that of ages 12 to 14. Now, some reasoning that I kind of came up with, maybe that more younger folks are getting into DCS, is Top Gun Maverick came out recently, and Eagle Dynamics did a big marketing push on YouTube to kind of say like, hey, Microsoft Flight Simulator, they've got their F-18 and you can look like Maverick, but we've got an F-18, you can look like Maverick still, but now you can access 90% of the jet that's locked away from you in Microsoft Flight Simulator. You can actually drop bombs, fire missiles, fire your gun, do all the pew pew stuff, have explosions and things like that. That just isn't present in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Also, probably less likely, but of course, the pilot shortage. There's a lot of articles and things out there kind of detailing the pilot shortage. So maybe more younger folks are potentially considering going into aviation or getting interested in aviation. And so they're hopping into a flight simulator. And DCS, in my opinion, is a lot more fun than Microsoft Flight Simulator because of all the pew pew stuff. So moving on to our next three questions here. These next three questions are kind of interrelated, but they're different enough to actually break them out individually. So do you work in the aviation industry, whether that be the military, airline, CFI? Do you work for a flight school, whatever it might be? This isn't necessarily limited either to pilots, but are you a ground crewman? Are you a crew chief? Are you a fueler? Are you an admin person? Whatever it might be. So 83.7% of you guys said no, whereas 16.3% of you guys said yes. So that's pretty cool. So you guys spend your whole day making your living, out on the flight line in the admin offices in the cockpit. Then you come home and you enjoy aviation as a hobby at home in DCS World. So pretty cool. And I mean, 16.3% of you guys out there, that's a pretty darn sizable chunk of the DCS World community that works every day in the aviation industry. Now, the third question here, do you work in the aerospace industry, whether that be Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, etc., etc.? And 95% of you said no, but 5% of you guys said yes. And I guess DCS World gives a very cool opportunity for someone who, say, works on the F-16 program at Lockheed Martin, and then they get to come home and as their hobby get to interact with that product that they've been working so hard on, and interact with that product in a way that they would never be able to unless they were a test pilot or flew in the Air Force or whatever it might be. So that's a really cool aspect of DCS, to allow those industry professionals to interact with those products that they're working on in a way that they just wouldn't be able to otherwise. Moving on here to, are you a licensed pilot in real life? 78.2% of you guys said no. 10.2% said you are a student pilot, and 11.6% of you guys said yes. So again, pretty sizable chunk of the DCS World community are actual pilots, whether student pilots or licensed, ready-to-go pilots. Of course, we didn't really break this down into, are you a hobbyist pilot or are you a professional pilot? But I think that that doesn't really matter so much for the purposes of our survey here. For you guys who are student pilots out there, definitely keep going. Today is a fantastic day and a fantastic time right now here in 2023 to be getting your pilot's license and to be going down the path of making aviation your career, whether it's a second career or even just a lifelong hobby. The world is running out of pilots, and it is a fantastic time to be a pilot. So another something to take from these three groups of questions here, this group of three questions, I should say, is really not everybody who flies in DCS interacts with aviation or the aviation industry, in their day-to-day lives in real life. But there's enough people out there who love fighter jets, who love airplanes and love learning about them and delving deep into them, that there's a lot of folks out there who want to fly in DCS who just don't interact with aviation on a day-to-day basis. And that's awesome. And I think that kind of speaks to the fact that DCS is an aspirational product. I can't tell you how many community members I interact with who are like, my eyes weren't good enough, or, I got in an accident, as a teenager or something of that nature that prevented them from becoming a military pilot or an airline pilot or whatever it is. And DCS World is their outlet to express that love of aviation and that wanting to be maverick for the day or something like that, So DCS is really an awesome outlet for those folks, and just for folks who are generally just airplane nerds like myself. I'm a pilot in real life, of course, but I'm definitely an aviation nerd to the core. That is for sure. So moving on from that, hopefully that was interesting for you guys to kind of get an insight into the overall kind of makeup of the DCS World community. How did you find DCS World? This is a really interesting one because I would think that people would only find it on YouTube. And the really interesting here is 5% of you guys actually found it through an advertisement. Now, Ecodynamics, I have seen do some YouTube advertising in very, very small scale. So that is interesting that they did, in fact, hook a couple folks with their advertisements. Of course, the vast majority of you guys, 50.3%, said you found it via YouTube content. That is no surprise at all. I think that's where most people find DCS is, maybe they just got home from an air show and they Google like, F-16 air show or something like that on Google or in YouTube, and DCS World content will pop up right away. And then people will be like, holy cow, that is so cool. I can actually fly an F-16 in my house. That's awesome. And so many people are like that I interact with on a day-to-day basis in the DCS community who are like, this is amazing. I'm going to build a computer. I'm going to save up my money and get all the peripherals and all this kind of stuff. And this is going to be the coolest game ever. And they hop into it and it's difficult, but they fall in love with it, just like I did. Internet search. I guess that's maybe people who are looking for a Microsoft Flight Simulator and stumble upon DCS. And of course, word of mouth of friends, family, etc. This is a big one. I've gotten a couple of people that I know personally into DCS World, and they never would have even looked at it on YouTube, but now they love it, and that's a fantastic way to go about it. Okay, how do you best learn DCS aircraft, the mission editor, and or other DCS World topics? Interesting. Not a big surprise here. YouTube content was the highest here, with 90% of folks saying they learn via YouTube. Second place is community created manuals. Example would be Chuck's guides. Is going to be 62% of respondents said that is one of their methods they use for learning DCS World topics. Then in third place here is going to be official modules. And that's 34.2% of folks. That's interesting to me because that's a lot lower than I would have thought. However, some of the manuals that come with DCS World aircraft are incredibly dense, sometimes even more dense than real NATOPS manuals or Dash 5s, which is interesting. And I think that Heapler's F-14 manual is the absolute best manual, official manual that is, because it's all hyperlinked, it's very well laid out, it's very nice and easy to find what you need to find in there. Interesting to me. I thought more people used real aircraft publications, NATOPS manuals, Dash 5s, whatever is publicly available. But only 18% of respondents said that is one of the methods they use for learning the aircraft. It is interesting to me. I guess just through the bias of seeing posts and things like that, people talking about it, I would have thought that would have been higher, but that's all good. This is an interesting one to me. I'm not really sure how I came up with this question, but the results are very interesting. Do you actively read about or consume aviation-related content outside of DCS World? Well, I can tell you guys that I absolutely do. I'm either flying airplanes, flying in DCS, reading about airplanes, writing about airplanes. It's kind of an all-encompassing part of my life is aviation. But 16.5% of you guys said no. And that's interesting. I mean, to each their own, but I can't imagine being outside of DCS or outside of the real cockpit and not be thinking about airplanes, which is interesting and kind of funny. I guess that maybe says more about me than it does about you guys. DCS World Battle Stations set up. So this is an interesting one here. So budget rig, so $0 to $1,000 spent on your rig. That's going to be 21% of you guys, which I thought would maybe be higher, but it's pretty much right in line with what we got for the last survey. And then we've got 36% of you guys are on mid-tier rigs. So I'm thinking that's going to be folks, with maybe like a slightly older generation CPU and maybe a Ryzen CPU, and then they're going to have, you know, more of the mid-tier graphics cards, maybe like a 60 series or 70 series, maybe one of the lower end 80 series, something like that. And then a pretty solid majority of you guys spent $2,000 or more on your DCS World rig. So I'm thinking that's going to be like Intel high-end processors, 80 series graphics cards, 90 series graphics cards, maybe even a few old Titans thrown in there. Things of that nature that are definitely going to bring up the price of those rigs and up the performance as well. This is also something is really interesting is when multi-threading and DLSS comes to DCS, it's going to allow folks who do have those budget rigs or those mid-tier rigs to get such better performance. It's going to be a massive, massive game changer for everybody. So I'm sure everybody is looking forward to that. DCS World controls setup. So whether you're using a mouse and keyboard, a game controller, a budget stick, or a HOTAS at different tiers here. So for the low end, I think that's going to be like some of those really low end Thrustmaster HOTASs. The mid tier is going to be like your T1600M, so a little bit higher Thrustmaster tier. Things like your X52, your X56. Mid tier is probably going to be like your Thrustmaster Warthog, and then high end is going to be your Windwing, as well as like your Virpil stuff, which I swear by Virpil throttle and stick base. I use a mix of Thrustmaster rudder pedals and Virpil rudder pedals, as well as a mix of Thrustmaster and Virpil stick grips as well. That's what I personally use. So 38.3% of you guys use high-end HOTASs. That is a bigger amount than I would have thought, but maybe that's just, you know, folks who are getting into DCS and, you know, they're just going for it. They're going for that high-end stuff first. When I personally am working with folks who are getting into DCS, whether through my training programs or just interacting with them, I always tell folks that if you think that DCS World is going to be your thing, that's going to be your hobby moving forward, spend the money up front and get that high-end HOTAS, get that good graphics card, get that good eye tracker, that good VR headset. Spend the money up front because you're going to get into it and you're going to be like, I love DCS. However, I need better stuff. And you're going to end up spending more money in the end if you know that DCS is going to be your thing. Second is going to be that mid-tier HOTAS, so folks using those Thrustmaster Warthogs. Then third is the mid-tier, so that's going to be your X52s, X56s, T1600Ms, and then of course your low-end HOTAS down there as well. A little scary. Almost 1% of you guys are using mouse and keyboards. That's difficult. I definitely use an Xbox controller for my TADEC controls in my AH64 Apache. And then budget sticks, that's going to be like maybe your single sticks. Folks just getting into it. I find that a lot of those younger folks who don't have that expendable income are going to be down here in this lower end tier, obviously, I suppose. Do you fly with rudder pedals? Whether you use a twist stick for your rudder axis, so like on an X56 or an X52, whether you're using the rudder axis on the throttles, like the T1600M throttle, that's about 10% of you guys, and then 66.6% of you guys have rudder pedals. Again, I thought this number was going to be lower, but I always tell people right off the bat, if you're going to get into DCS again, if you know you're going to like it, get rudder pedals right away. And then when people tell me they're flying the F-14 and that's why they got into DCS, I'm just like, dude, get rudder pedals right now. The T1600M throttle, I work with a lot of folks who have physical disabilities who love DCS because it's, you know, they've wanted to be pilots and it's freeing and it's a beautiful, fun game. I work with a lot of folks with those physical disabilities that prevent them from using rudder pedals, and I always tell them, go to the T1600M throttle because it has those front paddles on the throttle grip that allow you to use your fingertips for your rudder axis. And this is a far, far better solution, in my opinion, than using a twist grip on your stick. And that's because you don't want to have both your pitch, your roll, and your yaw on one controller. You want to kind of split off that yaw over to your left hand on the throttle. And that's just such a fantastic solution for those folks who do have some physical difficulties in allowing them to get in and get the most out of DCS. I wish that maybe somebody would come up with a more high-end throttle, a better quality throttle that does have those finger paddles for that kind of a crowd who may be not able to use rudder pedals for any reason. So that way they can have a higher-end throttle like a Virpil, like a Windwing, whatever it is, that does allow them to use that left hand for their throttle or for their rudder axis, which would be pretty darn cool. Head tracking. Do you fly with head tracking? No head tracking, 12.6% of you guys definitely get head tracking. You will get far more enjoyment out of DCS World, and you'll no longer be exploding out of nowhere because you can't find the MiG that's on your 6 o'clock very easily. 56.5% of folks are using head tracking as opposed to VR, whereas 30% or 31% more or less of you guys are using VR out there. Now, I believe in our last survey, there was a higher percentage of you guys using VR and a lower percentage of you guys just using head tracking on a flat screen. I think that VR is slightly falling out of vogue, not just in DCS, but as a whole throughout all of gaming space, because VR technology kind of has plateaued in its advancement. I know that for me, the screen door effect and whatnot, and the kind of lag in the headset that makes me sick to my stomach, I don't really like VR, as well as flat panel and being able to record on the flat panel makes me able to make content for you guys a lot easier and a lot nicer looking content. But maybe in the future when VR kind of catches up and can be really beautiful, have no issues of performance, things like that, or it's just plug and play, you don't have to have any extra programs running, I'll probably make the jump to VR eventually. Maps that you own for DCS World. One thing that really surprised me here is that 62.1% of you guys who responded here said that you owned the NTTR, the Nevada Test and Training Range map. That was very surprising to me, because when I try to host missions on the NTTR, I usually have quite a drop-off in the number of people who sign up. Not a big surprise here, Syria and Persian Gulf. I'm also very surprised by how close the number is between people who own Syria at 86.7% and people who own the Persian Gulf at 86.3%. That is super close. These guys are neck and neck here. I would say that right now, for most folks, the crown jewel in DCS World's, crown is going to be Syria. The Syria map is amazing. Whether you are a fixed wing or a rotary wing pilot or even a warbird pilot, Syria is absolutely gorgeous and is kind of the gold standard for DCS World maps moving forward. And I think for me and myself, it's going to be what I judge every other map going forward against is going to be Syria until a new map kind of takes the crown jewel from there. South Atlantic map down at basically the second to lowest. Not a big surprise there. I don't think that people really liked the South Atlantic map coming out of the gate with some of the reviews out there. I think it's pretty good. I think it definitely needed more airfields, and it's getting more and more airfields going forward. So hopefully we can move to the South Atlantic map and do some more content on that guy moving forward here. Persian Gulf map, always awesome, especially the new lighting updates on Persian Gulf, fantastic. I find that screenshots on the Persian Gulf with the lighting effects that they have there, absolutely the best screenshots you can get in DCS World are always taken on the Persian Gulf map. I don't know what it is. I think for me it's probably that the lighting on the Persian Gulf map is slightly cooler, whereas it's slightly warmer on the Syria map, and I find that the slightly cooler version makes better screenshots. Just a personal thing there. The channel is pretty low, only 33.9%, and the Normandy 35.9%. I think that's just because warbirds in particular are less popular overall in the DCS World community as opposed to modern jets. And so the World War II, things made for World War II aren't as popular and are always down towards the bottom of the list. The reason Caucasus is not on here is because it's free. Everybody owns that. Same thing with the Marianas map. It's free. Everybody owns that. And that's also why it's not included in our next question here. Favorite map for single player, multiplayer missions and campaigns is simply because everybody flies on Caucasus. Everybody flies on Marianas if they can because it's free. So not a big surprise here. Syria, again, the crown jewel of DCS at the moment at 60.3% for favorite map for single player and multiplayer missions. Persian Gulf is second with nearly 30%, so 27.4% of folks responding saying they love Persian Gulf the most. The NTTR is in third place there. Really interesting. That's even ahead of the South Atlantic map, and the South Atlantic map is quite new. The NTTR is a great little map. It's really fun. I really like NTTR, and I hope that one day Eagle Dynamics can get back to the NTTR and give it a facelift, make it look a little bit nicer. I know they've said that they won't do this, but it'd be really cool if they could extend the map just a little bit to the north and to the west for the Fallon range complexes and NAS Fallon. That would be really freaking cool. In the future, I also kind of want a Southern California map, to get in San Diego and up into LA and stuff. I think that'd be a pretty cool map for DCS. Moving on. Maps that you want more content for, single player and multiplayer missions and or campaigns. Another interesting question here with Syria coming out on top, Persian Gulf in second place, and South Atlantic jumps up to third place here. I think that South Atlantic could definitely use a lot more content. It's a new map that is actively being worked on, and it's actively looking better and better and better and having more airfields put on it. And so some more content for South Atlantic would be great. We're just kind of missing some of the assets for South Atlantic that would make for some really compelling campaigns and missions. Like, we don't have a Sea Harrier, we don't have an F4 that we could potentially put on, an Ark Royal type aircraft carrier and do like a fictional scenario of F4s being on carriers during the Falklands War, things like that. They're just kind of missing that. Hopefully will develop further in the future and we'll get more content that really matches and goes with the South Atlantic map. And that's one of the things that I always advise, developers when they ask me, is I try to help guide them to match their aircraft or their campaigns or terrains or whatever it might be to what's already in DCS to allow them to generate more sales and potentially stick around as a developer for DCS. DCS fixed-wing aircraft that you own. Of course, the king of DCS World, or I guess I should say the queen of DCS World, is the A-18C Hornet, and it is still holding on to that first place title, and I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. Different from our last survey, the F-16C Fighting Falcon, the Viper, comes in at second place with 74.6% of folks who responded own the Viper. The Tomcat is just ekes out in third place, but I'm not surprised by that. And then, of course, the A-10C Warthog is in close fourth there. For full fidelity modules, the Harrier comes out right after the Warthog, and then Flaming Cliffs 3 is down here as well. Pretty popular, and especially for folks who are just getting into DCS World, usually we'll get Flaming Cliffs 3 right off the bat, get a whole bunch of jets to play with, not too complicated, all of that. Something that was kind of disturbing in this survey that I kind of felt really bad for the developers was the new MB339 aircraft. The little Italian trainer is way down here. Only 184 people who responded out of 3,500 said that they owned that aircraft. And I think that trainer aircraft going forward is not a smart play for any developer coming into DCS World. Sales are going to be way down. folks are just not going to be interested, unfortunately. There's already the L-39, the C-101, now the MB-339. I think the only trainer aircraft that could potentially, eclipse maybe some combat types would be maybe a T-45 Goshawk. But that has the stigma of there already being the failed third-party dev and failed module of just a BAE Hawk, as well as the fact that there is a mod for the T-45 Goshawk out there that will probably prevent any developer from saying, you know what, we should just make a T-45 mod, because people are going to just say, oh, well, I'm going to just get the free mod anyway, not spend any money. Which is also one of the reasons why I don't think we'll be seeing like a H-60 Blackhawk for a long time, is because of that free mod. Unfortunately, this is why mods might hurt developers going forward, is because why would somebody get the full fidelity module when they can just fly the free mod? So, I mean, a lot of these break out to what you'd expect. Unfortunately, down here, we can also see that a lot of the Warbird types are very, very small in number for people that own them. I think that modern jets and helicopters is the bread and butter of DCS World, and that's probably where the bulk of effort for development, in my opinion, should go towards, is Cold War and modern jets. So I think the F4 is going to spike in popularity coming out. The F-15E, of course, is going to be very, very popular. But this is kind of all washes out to what I would expect. I just feel kind of bad for the MB339 developers here. Moving forward. Do you fly one fixed-wing aircraft exclusively or almost exclusively? Again, here we can see even more evidence that the A-18C Hornet is the absolute king and or queen of DCS World. I believe in our last survey, the aircraft flown exclusively or almost exclusively, it was like 51% Hornet. So the Hornet is losing market share to the F-16C Viper. As the Viper matures, people are getting more into the Viper. It's a very, it's a jet that's everywhere. So if you're from Greece, you want to fly the F-16. If you're from Turkey, you want to fly the F-16. If you're from Japan, you probably want to fly the F-16 because that's pretty close to a Viper Zero. The F-16 is everywhere, so it has a very, very broad appeal. And as it gets developed out more and more and more, it becomes a more mature module, it's going to take more and more of that FA-18 market share away. Then, of course, we can see in third place here, the queen of the skies, the F-14A and B Tomcat, the coolest jet ever to fly ever, is in third place there with 10% of DCS World pilots flying that aircraft nearly exclusively. Now, some runner-ups there, some honorable mentions are going to be the Harrier, as well as the Warthog. And then we've got people like Cortana who fly the Mirage 2000, like, basically only. A couple of folks fly the JF-17, but just get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as you get down to, the World War II aircraft and the Korean War era aircraft. Again, another reason why I think that the modern jets are kind of the bread and butter of DCS, but it could be a slight bias of my channel because I do focus on the modern jets. But even still, I think that that's a more or less valid thing to say. I also think that this large segment of Hornet flyers in DCS World, people who love the Hornet in DCS, also means that there is room. And I think that it would be successful for a developer, most likely a third-party developer at this point, to build a Super Hornet, so an FA-18E or F, going forward, as well as I think it'd be pretty cool if Eagle Dynamics could go back and maybe do like a small paid upgrade or an additional module for the Hornet to make an FA-18D. A two-seater Hornet, I think, could be pretty darn cool in DCS. What fixed-wing aircraft do you want more content for? We can see here the Hornet is dropping down because there is a lot of content out there for the Hornet, but the Viper, the F-16 is definitely the aircraft that, in my opinion, needs the most content generated for it. So folks who are building campaigns for right now, I would advise them to go for F-16 on the Syria map. That's going to be a match made in heaven, and that's going to lead to the most campaign sales right now. There are a ton of F-18 campaigns out there. More F-14 campaigns, people want that as well. There are quite a few out there at this point, so that's a little bit saturated, I would say. And then more people want more Harrier content, which is interesting. So 10%, almost 10% wanted more Harrier content, which is pretty cool. I think that the Harrier at this point is kind of becoming a forgotten module, unfortunately, kind of like the JF-17, and that more content for the Harrier could, I think, lead to a little bit of a revival for that aircraft. I also think that an upgrade to the Harrier or a separate module of an AV-8B plus with the radar, the AN APG 65 radar in it, would be a massive upgrade, and it would make the Harrier very, very popular going forward. The Harrier was created in that time in DCS World where the Hornet wasn't even out, and there was a lot of development work that needed to be done and fleshed out, and things brought to DCS World that wouldn't allow for an AV-8B Plus to actually be developed by RASBAM at that time. So they worked with what they could, and they created the night attack variant of the Harrier. But I think if RASBAM was making the Harrier right now, with all of the extra stuff and infrastructure that's been built into DCS World, they would be building the AV-8B Plus, not the night attack variant, would be my educated guess on that. Okay. DCS World Rotary Wing aircraft that you own. As you guys know, I didn't really get into rotary wing aircraft in DCS very much until recently, until the Apache came out. Flew the Hind a bit. 76% of people who responded said they own the Apache. I thought the Hind was going to be in second place. That's what I totally thought, but I was mistaken. The Huey's in second place with 65% of those who responded saying they own it. The Black Shark is in third place, followed by the Hind in fourth, and then the Hip and the Gazelle being rather low and pretty darn close to each other in terms of how many folks own those modules. I totally thought the Hip would be higher and the Hind would be higher, but that's what we got. Do you fly one rotary wing aircraft exclusively or almost exclusively? 48% of folks who responded said they fly the Apache exclusively. Not a big surprise there. It's a modern Western helicopter with screens, and it's got Hellfire missiles, and it can fire rockets. It's got a movable turret for a gun, which is super cool. So really not surprised by this at all. I am very surprised by who came in second place here, with almost 20% of folks saying they fly the Huey exclusively. Big surprise to me. I totally thought that that was going to go to the Hip or the Hind or the Black Shark or something like that, but pretty interesting there. The Black Shark is in third place with the Hind coming in fourth. Interesting stuff, guys. What rotary wing aircraft do you want to see more content for? Of course, this was always going to go to the Apache. It's the newest rotary wing module. It's the most modern Western rotary wing module. More Apache campaigns would be awesome. So if you're out there, you're thinking about making a third-party campaign for DCS that you would want to sell in the store, I would absolutely encourage you to go for a Apache campaign on the Syria map. Again, that's going to be the match made in heaven, and that's going to lead to the most sales for you. And hopefully that'll generate more revenue for you, and you'll be able to create more campaigns going forward. Do you prefer fixed wing or rotary wing aircraft for DCS World missions / campaigns? Again, this probably is biased by my channel since I fly mostly fixed wing, but I do think that it's definitely a very good guess to say that the majority of folks in DCS World do fly fixed wing over rotary wing aircraft. So only about 13.5% of folks who responded to this survey fly a rotary wing, prefer rotary wing for missions and campaigns, whereas over 85% of those folks who responded said that they prefer those fixed wing aircraft. Not a big surprise there, but this is smaller than I thought it would be. Most anticipated upcoming DCS World aircraft. No big surprise here again. Everyone said the F-15E. That's going to be a fantastic aircraft. From what I have experienced from the F-15E, it's a great jet. You guys are really going to like it, but it's going to be a lot different than I think what a lot of folks are expecting. I think that's a good thing because it really is different from the other modern Western aircraft that we have in DCS, which is great. It's always good to have differentiation for mission creators, for people who just want to fly something different with their new module. You don't just want a cookie cutter copy of every other aircraft that you've already got. So interesting here. The Eurofighter Typhoon eked out in front of the Phantom in terms of what people are looking forward to most in second place. I think that's just because it's a British jet, or I should say that it's a European modern jet, which would be the first one that we have in DCS. Which would be very cool for sure. I'm definitely looking forward to the Typhoon, but that is so far over the horizon right now that I can't even get hyped for it. However, the F4, man, holy cow. I cannot wait for the F4 in DCS. It's going to be perfect for the Syria map. It's going to be perfect for the upcoming Sinai map, of course. It's going to be perfect for the Persian Gulf map. It's going to be perfect for the Marianas map because the Japanese and the South Koreans fly it. Man, the F4 is going to be so cool. I cannot wait for the F4 Phantom in DCS. I'm probably more anticipating the F4 than I am the F-15E, but I am super excited for the F-15E. Most anticipated upcoming DCS terrain / map. The Kola Peninsula ekes out in front, just barely in front of the Sinai Peninsula. I would say personally that I'm probably a little bit more excited for the Sinai map just because of the historical provenance of the map. And that is what I studied all through college, getting my aviation history degree, was the Arab-Israeli conflicts. And so that's going to be the Sinai map, and the F4 is going to be so awesome for Yom Kippur War and War of Attrition type missions and campaigns. On the Sinai map, that's going to be amazing. Kola map is going to be really cool as well. You could kind of do like a fictional Cold War Gone Hot, or like a Hunt for Red October type mission or campaign. Something like that could be very cool. And then Top End Australia. That's another map that I think, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think that's going to go more like the South Atlantic map, where not as many people are going to end up buying it because it's not really a combat theater. All of our aircraft that we have in DCS fit the Top End Australia map really well, because that's where Tyndall Air Base is up there, and the big Tyndall ranges, where they basically do Operation Red Flag type training exercises there, but they're in Australia, and they convene a lot of friendly to Western interest Asian nations like Singapore, Japan, the Philippines, places like that are definitely, friendly nations in the Asian sphere. And Australia has a lot of room for jets. Like Singaporean F-15s don't get to range very far from Singapore because they're basically surrounded by Indonesian territory. So they get to go to Australia or even to the United States to do training exercises. They'll take that opportunity at any time they can take it. Favorite era depicted in DCS World modules, maps, and content. Again, guys, not a big surprise here. 58.4% of you guys said the modern era. I contextualize the modern era as being 1991 to present. In DCS, that's kind of 1991 to 2010. We don't really have anything all that much newer than 2010, except for maybe the JF-17 Thunder. But the JF-17 was definitely in testing and trials through the early aughts, that's for sure. And the F-15E, of course, is going to slide right into that era. Second most popular era is the 1975 to 1991. I called that the late Cold War era. That's going to be perfect for the F4 and a lot of the other jets that we have in DCS, because a lot of the jets that we have, we can kind of degrade back to that late Cold War scenario by limiting what kind of weapons they can carry to dumb bombs, very basic laser-guided bombs, AIM-9Ls, AIM-7s, things like that. So we can kind of degrade those jets back to that kind of era. Not super surprising here, World War II is way low on the list. Again, I think that development work should be more focused on modern scenarios and Cold War scenarios than World War II. So these are some new questions that we did not have in the last survey, and I think this will help especially mission makers and campaign designers kind of tailor their missions to what DCS World players really like to do inside of DCS. So your favorite mission set / role that you like to play in multiplayer and single player. I totally thought that deep strike, strategic targets behind enemy lines, things like bunkers, airfields, petroleum, oil, and lubricant storage, strategic targets, I totally thought that was going to come out in front as the most popular. However, we can see that ground attack, close air support, battlefield air interdiction, and armed reconnaissance eked out in front of it by 4%. So again, I was kind of surprised by this. But that's probably those A10 boys ganging up to skew the results there, because I'm always up for a deep strike, dropping a big old laser-guided bomb from my F-14 Tomcat, that's for sure. Following up with that, we've got, offensive counter-air coming in third place, followed by SEAD. I really did think that SEAD and DIAD / Wild Weasel type missions were going to be a lot higher in the list, because we've got so many folks who are really enjoying flying the F-16, and that's kind of the bread and butter role of the F-16C Block 50. And then down there is going to be defensive counter-air, so cap, intercept, and bar cap is kind of in fifth place there, followed by a couple of other roles like battlefield logistics, troop transport, supporting roles, people who like to be an LSO and AWACS, GCI, ATC, etc., and then reconnaissance down there as well. So the way I think that any potential dev of a campaign could look at this would be like, okay, we should skew more towards ground attack. We should have some deep strike missions. We should also have some counter-air, but that's going to be lower on the list. We should also have some SEAD and DIAD, kind of like move your percentages of these mission types in your campaign to kind of match this pie graph here. I think that's going to give you that perfect mix of mission types for what people really like to fly in DCS. Favorite air-to-ground weapons loadouts. So the most fun thing for you to use in multiplayer or single-player missions. Not a big surprise here, guided missiles. I thought that laser-guided bombs would beat guided missiles, but 6% more people like guided missiles better. So that's going to be like your Mavericks, your laser-guided rockets, your Hellfires, etc., etc. In second place is laser-guided bombs. For me personally, I think that LGBs are the most fun thing to do with DCS, because it requires a lot of work, man in the loop, in order to make them work correctly. And if they work great, then it's awesome. And then if they don't work great, you screwed it up. Then we've got GPS, INS guided bombs, so JDAMs, etc. For my own mission creation, I tend to limit JDAMs to more for aircraft or aircraft roles, or to meet weather requirements, because you can drop JDAMs through weather, obviously, whereas you can't do that with LGBs. It's kind of not as fun. It's a little bit more boring, because you just fly over the target and you press the button and they hit the target, and it's not as much man in the loop. It's not quite as much fun, in my opinion. But other folks really like it. Then we got unguided freefall bombs, anti-radiation missiles, glide bombs, and unguided rockets. So again, a mission maker or a campaign maker could look at that and kind of judge what kind of weapons they should give the player in their arsenal in order to fulfill the mission type that they set up, and see what people want to use the most. Favorite air-to-air weapons loadouts? Fox 3s take the cake. I guess I'm not super surprised by that. Then we've got high off-bore sight Fox 2s, so AIM-9X R73, followed by all-aspect Fox 2s, rear aspect Fox 2s, and Fox 1s kind of round out the rest of it there. big question here. Do you fly in multiplayer? And 76.3% of you guys said yes, whereas 23.7% of you guys said no. This number here is lower than what we had in our last survey. So maybe that means that more folks are hopping into multiplayer and enjoying DCS World multiplayer as that space kind of gets more fleshed out with more user-generated content, more kind of like online squadrons for people to fly with, things like that. Do you prefer single player or multiplayer? Most folks prefer multiplayer with 61.4%. Again, this was pretty much 50-50 in the last survey. So again, seems like maybe more people are getting into and flying in DCS World multiplayer. Do you fly single player exclusively? Only 22.5% of you guys said yes. This is again a much smaller number than we had in our last survey. Quite a bit more folks were flying in single player exclusively. Of course, and 77.5% of you guys say no, we fly in multiplayer as well. Do you like PvP or PvE, which is, of course, co-op multiplayer better? Vast majority of you guys, 75% of you guys, like PvE better than you like PvP. Interesting. I didn't think it was going to be that much. I thought it was going to be more, closer to about 50-50, but to each their own, and I personally like PvE better myself. Do you prefer flying in persistent servers or scripted missions and events? Most people prefer persistent servers, which is interesting to me because I personally don't like persistent servers. I tend to go for scripted missions and events. But again, everybody's got their own preference, and that's totally fine. Do you enjoy a storyline and or role-playing aspect of DCS multiplayer servers, missions, and events? Almost 85% of people said yes, they do like a storyline and or role-playing aspect. And that's what I've really been trying to bring to my community with the Operation Burning Sands missions, to try and kind of have a bit more role-playing, a bit more storyline, kind of tends to motivate my community members a little bit more into flying better because they have an objective of advancing the story and hopefully making our side win the day, and then further advance the campaign towards a good side of that campaign rather than a negative side of that campaign. Do you like casual and fun multiplayer games like Capture the Flag or King of the Hill, things like that? 52% of you guys said yes, whereas 47% said no. That's interesting. I'm not sure how that's going to help too many folks out there, but just an interesting little thing to see. Do you fly and or enjoy DCS World War II era modules? 57% of those who responded said no, whereas 42.7% said yes. I think that means that there are folks out there, quite a bit, that do like DCS World War II, but that probably think that DCS World War II needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. Again, I still think that the bread and butter of DCS World is modern jets and helicopters, but that is up to the devs to decide, I guess, where they want to go. Do you plan to buy any DCS World War II era modules in the future? No is 52.6, and yes is 47.4, more or less identical to what we've got up here about the last question there. Do you plan to buy any DCS trainer type aircraft, example a T-45 Goshawk, in the future? No is 70.7% of folks. Yes is almost 30% of folks as well. So again, if I were a dev, I would not be looking to make a trainer type aircraft for DCS World because of the fact that people are just not going to buy it, unfortunately. And again, we kind of saw that with the very low numbers of folks who had the MB339 in their DCS World hangar. This one's kind of more for me. Do you own the DCS World War II assets pack? There are some cool assets that are inside of the asset pack that I wish were open and available to everybody who didn't have the asset pack that we could use. Like, I could definitely use the Liberty ship in a more modern scenario. I could definitely use more of the flak units, German tanks, things like that, that are because German tanks were present in Syria for a long, long time, and even used during the Arab-Israeli wars. So things like that would be nice if they were outside of that, but it does show us here that almost 40% of the community does in fact own the asset pack. Do you own the DCS Supercarrier module? Yes versus no. About 75% of you guys own it versus about 25% of you guys that do not own it. And then finally, the last question here, guys. Thank you so much for sticking with this very long kind of explanation of the survey today. What are you looking forward to most in the future of DCS World? 42.4% of you guys are looking for DCS World engine improvements, whether that be the Vulkan API, multi-threading, DLSS, whatever it might be. And I definitely am with you guys. That's going to be an awesome upgrade to DCS World, multi-threading, DLSS, Vulkan API. All that is going to bring DCS World kicking and screaming into the modern gaming era, so to speak, as well as allow a whole new segment of PC gamers to get into DCS because they don't have those super high-end rigs to get playable performance out of DCS World. So that's always a good thing. It's going to lead to more folks, more sales, more revenue, means more stuff for DCS, which is fantastic. 22.8% of you guys said you're looking forward most to new fixed-wing jet aircraft. So that's probably those guys out there that are really excited for the F-15E and the F-4. I'm with you guys too, man. I had a hard time myself deciding whether to vote for new engine improvements or new fixed-wing aircraft. And then 20.8% of you guys said DCS World Dynamic Campaign. That is going to be another major game changer for DCS World and the DCS World landscape, because people are going to be able to generate a campaign with very little work and be able to hop in and fly and have a really good time without having to put in all this extra work and all this extra effort into creating their own scenario or downloading somebody else's scenario or buying somebody else's scenario. And when the dynamic campaign becomes part of multiplayer, that'll be a ton of fun and save me, oh my gosh, gobs and gobs of time. So guys, again, thanks so much for sticking it out through this long video. I hope this video was informative to you and interesting and gave you some insight into the DCS World community and player trends and where things are going. And again, if you're a dev, if you're at Eagle Dynamics, if you are a third-party dev, if you are a prospective third-party dev, and you would like access to this raw data, please send me a line, email me, send me a message on Discord, whatever it is, and I will get you this raw data. And if you'd like me to walk you through it in person, I can absolutely do that as well. So thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day and fly safe out there.